It's time for Recipe of the Day. Chicken Milanese. You have to make it just so you get to say it, but also because it's delicious. And it's really just a fancy way of saying chicken cutlet. Chicken Milanese is very similar to a schnitzel and to just the English word cutlet that's been breaded and pan fried. I especially like to serve it with an arugula salad with a lemon dressing and some Parmesan cheese, sort of big shreds of Parmesan cheese. Like you take that wedge and you use a potato peeler and you just shred these big, shreds off of the wheel of cheese. You know what I mean. So I'll tell you to make this. First, what does it mean, chicken Milanese? It just means in the style of Milan, as in from the city, Milan. And that style, when it comes to food and meat in particular, refers to thin slices of meat that are dredged in always breadcrumbs, sometimes flour first, and then pan fried. It's nice and crispy on the outside and still juicy on the inside because it doesn't actually cook for very long. In Italy, it is usually made from veal or beef, sometimes chicken, occasionally pork. It's also popular in Argentina because of some Italian immigration that happened in the late 19th century. And so there's different versions in Argentina. I have not been to Argentina, but it excites me to find out about how these different foods come from one place and become popular somewhere else and then take on their whole new thing, you know? One of these days, I will tell you about the Icelandic dessert Vina Tarta that became popular in my home province of Manitoba, but is no longer made in Iceland. Fascinating, right? But that's a story for another day. We are sticking with the chicken here. So we are making this with chicken breast. You can get chicken breast cutlets that are already those sort of like flattened pieces of chicken, or you can use regular chicken breast and you slice them in half horizontally. So you put the chicken breast on your cutting board and then you have your knife running parallel to the cutting board and you go through the chicken all the way through until you have two pieces from that chicken breast. And then you want to pound them to about 1/3 of an inch thick. You don't have to pound them if you don't want to. It's that thing about making them a little bit thinner so they cook more quickly. So I do like to do that. Sometimes the chicken breasts are small enough to start with that you don't need to pound them. They are already right at the right place. And I'll just give you my little tip for pounding chicken here. I like to put the piece of chicken that I'm going to be pounding thinner between two pieces of plastic wrap. That way, when you start hitting it, you're not like spattering your kitchen with little bits of chicken juice that you can't even see. You know what I mean? So you could do that. And then for the actual pounding, I usually just use a rolling pin. I have a mallet, like a flat mallet, not one of those like ones that's going to puncture. I have one somewhere, but I can never find it because I don't use it very often. And so every time I think about looking for it, I just don't even bother and grab my rolling pin instead. So that works great. So you have two chicken breasts and you're cutting each one into two. So you end up with 4 portions. Season both sides of those portions with salt and pepper. It's about a teaspoon of salt total and half a teaspoon of pepper total. And then you're going to do the dredging process, which I don't always love, but I will say it has gotten a lot better since I've stopped even trying to use my fingers to do this. You know, you hear people talk about how you're going from flour to egg to breadcrumbs, and you should keep one hand dry in the flour and one hand is the wet one going in the eggs, and then you don't end up breading your fingers. But I've never been good at it. Now I have these little tongs that I use, and sometimes I just use forks, and then I don't even care if I'm mixing up the dry hand with the wet hand because my hands are not touching anything, you know? So yeah, you're getting 3 bowls that are shallow and bigger than your chicken cutlets are across. And I like to use pie plates for this actually. So you line up your 3 pie plates into one. You put half a cup of just regular all-purpose flour. Into the second one, you put 2 eggs that you whisk up really well. And then in the third one, you put 1 cup of breadcrumbs, just plain, regular, unseasoned, not panko breadcrumbs, and a teaspoon of garlic powder, and then set a plate at the other end. So you have flour pie plate egg pie plate, breadcrumb pie plate, and then a regular plate at the other end, which the chicken's going to go onto once it's breaded. And then you take one piece of chicken and dip it in both sides in the flour, then both sides in the egg, then both sides in the breadcrumbs. I will tell you, my favorite way to do this is to actually dip one in the flour on both sides and then move it into the egg, flip it over in the egg, and then do the second one in the flour. And then that gives the egg just a little bit of time to start soaking into the flour a little bit, right? Then flip that first one over again and then put it into the breadcrumbs, then move the second one into the egg. And you're just kind of letting things kind of sit in their containers for just that little extra moment longer. And then when it comes to the breadcrumb pie plate, I find you get a much better coating if you actually sprinkle some breadcrumbs over top and then push down on them with your hands. Something about the pressure of your hand just molds to the chicken a little bit and pushes the breadcrumbs, which are, they're small, but they are like kind of sharp, like pushes them into the chicken so it sticks better and you get just a little bit thicker coating. So I always put the chicken into the breadcrumbs. Sometimes I'll like flip it once quick and then a little handful of breadcrumbs from the pie plate from right like under it or around it on top, push down and then flip, put more on top, spread it out, push down on that as well. Then that gets transferred to your empty plate at the end and you repeat that with all 4 of your chicken cutlets. Now, if you have a skillet big enough to cook all 4 of these in a single layer where they're not super crowded, then you're going to do them all at once. But if your skillet is a little bit smaller than that, you're going to keep 2 warm while you cook the last 2. So preheat your oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, get out a baking sheet and set an oven-safe rack on top of that. Set that aside. I also like to get out a plate and put some paper towels on it. That's going to be to blot the excess oil off of the chicken before transferring it to the rack or transferring it to the serving plate, okay? Then you're measuring 2 tablespoons of olive oil or vegetable oil, whatever you like to cook with, in your skillet, and you are setting that over medium-high heat. And when the oil is hot, you add the chicken. If you're doing all 4, add all 4. If you're just doing 2, just do 2. And you're cooking until it's well browned underneath, about 3 to 4 minutes. Then flip and do the second side until it's browned, another 2 to 3 minutes. I usually do like to just cut inside and make sure it's not pink right in the middle. And then if you're serving them right away, they just get transferred to the plate with a paper towel. So to flip them once and then you're going ahead and serving them. If you're keeping too warm, blot the 2 that you just cooked on the paper towel, transfer them to the rack, put that in the oven, then cook the other 2. You might need to add a little bit more oil first, heat it up again. Then when they're done, they get blotted on the paper towel and then you're serving right then. And yes, I like to put that right on top of that arugula salad with the lemony dressing and the Parmesan cheese shreds on top, the chicken Milanese cutlet right on there. A few cherry tomatoes would be great as well. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is March 5th of 2025. And if you like chicken recipes, you've got to check out my chicken cookbook. It is a true resource book, over 200 recipes, and they use traditional cooking methods, oven, stove, grill, slow cooker, and also the Instant Pot and air fryer. So whatever appliance you feel like using, there is a recipe for you. Tons of tips, tons of recipes. It is the all-new chicken cookbook, and you can find that on Amazon. I will put a link in the show notes of this podcast episode, or if you go to Amazon, search for all-new chicken cookbook Pittman, and you will find it there. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast recipe of the day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.